I can't respect that when the one person who I think has done the most damage post Charlie Kirk is clearly Candace Owens and has the most clearly unethical behavior. They're slaves to their own branding in a way. They're like, I don't cancel people. So that means what? You don't have any standards of critique or criticism?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Western Spirit here from Israel. And with me now is Ami Kozak. He's the host of Ami's House, the great podcast. And he's a comedian, entertainer, and I think somewhat of a celebrity now in conservative circles beyond just the Jewish community. And for those who want to check that out, go to Ami's episode where he spoke about the TPUSA conference, which was very interesting to me. And we'll get into that a little bit. So, Ami, it's a pleasure to speak with you again.
Nice to be with you, saving Western civilization one podcast at a time, my friend.
We're trying.
Yeah.
Ami, let's go. I want to just ask you about current events before we get into the topic I wanted to get to you.
Yeah.
Maduro was just caught from Venezuela, and the reaction has been a little bit revealing in terms of the things that you talk about a lot. So we saw first of all, there's the silent people, like Tucker. I don't think has said one word since the capture. Before that, he said that it was Global Homo who was who was doing this. And Candace has said that it's the Zionists, which is predictable.
Shocking. Yeah.
Yeah. So can you, and Marjorie Taylor Greene obviously said this is in America first. And on the other hand, you have a lot of people now praising Rubio. And it seems that that's coming as sort of a catharsis to the America, like the Groyper right sort of thing. So how do you see the reaction to what we're seeing right now?
I find it interesting because, for one thing, you know, the sort of fact that this is happening in our hemisphere, I think allows for a lot of people who saw the Israel conflict, or whether it be Ukraine, that's somehow, because it's geographically far away, we look at America's involvement in any such thing around the world, and people write it off as insignificant, not important, not relevant, without actually doing the research as to determining if it is or not. They're not actually doing the work or affiliating themselves with the issue. They're just saying, oh, this area far must not be relevant to America. I'm America first. But the fact that Venezuela is in our hemisphere, I guess, allows people to sort of take that instinct and knee-jerk reaction down to say, you know what, maybe America first also means having to involve yourself in things that aren't necessarily happening within the geographic location of America, but still have American interests. Now, do I have a hardline informed position on if this policy was the exact correct policy of capturing Maduro? No, because it's not my area of affiliation in terms of, I certainly know the Israel stuff a lot more. But I certainly know enough to know that socialism is horrible and what Maduro and Chavez did to Venezuela is horrible, and that the economic decline going from the richest country in South America to the poorest, that's something you can see with your own eyes and just knowing a little bit about a situation. So I can certainly see a strong case to be made for why he has to go, and why, there's this interesting conversation now to be had as to, well, in what sense is this in America's interest? I still agree with the standard that America has to operate in its own interest and shouldn't be this selfless liberator around the world. That could be pretty reckless. However, it at least opens up the conversation to say, just because something isn't in the borders of the United States does not mean the United States doesn't have an interest in being involved in it, in a world where we're all globally connected and we're in a globalized economy where everything is dependent on different factors. So that conversation was always, a lot of people who were anti-Israel in that scenario over the last 2 years that we saw were hiding behind this idea that we're just isolationists. We just want to focus on America. And this kind of reveals and separates the wheat from the chaff a little bit over, okay, wait a minute. Maybe we can realize that America as a force in the world operating from America's self-interest, we can evaluate these things without having the baggage of the last 2 years of all those kind of false narratives that people hid behind. Now, I think it's interesting because of what's happening here. You can't help but think, wow, say what you want, America is just freaking badass. And I think that Trump is trying to showcase that in a way that the policy of deterrence and peace through strength, if you're a dictator around the world who's been hostile to the United States and the West, you are crapping your pants right now, because you're realizing that if a president has the guts to actually operate in the country's self-interest and will do it, I think as a deterrent, this could have reverberating effects for Iran and all the other enemies of the United States. And I know people think they've heard that before, but a lot of people also have broken Iraq brain, and they think every situation, just because there's such a thing as one failed war in the past, which I would agree on, that means it's the same scenario every single time America has to go to any sort of conflict at all. And I think that's a very simplistic way of thinking about things.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've debated, and I think you guys in Ami's house have been talking about, is how much influence does the broadly speaking, let's say the Tucker wing of the party, of the conservative movement, have in the Trump orbit or Trump administration? And the Wall Street Journal reported, I think today, that one of the calculations was that Trump was debating in his inner circle whether his base would support it if this happened, or whether people in the base would be angry, whether it was successful or not. And then Trump decided to do it because he thought that the base would support him. And I wonder what you think in terms of the Iran strike that happened, and now this, and President Trump threatening other countries. Now he's threatening Cuba and Greenland, obviously, and all these other places. So does he feel, I think, that they're really a minority of a minority, or maybe we're giving him maybe we should be very worried about them? Like, how do you measure their sphere of influence in the conservative/Republican movement?
Trump doesn't seem to care all that much about these elements in the base that are sort of trying to divide MAGA, that are trying to steer him away from the typical policies and positions he's always had, which are pro-Israel and pro-Western in general. He doesn't, people like to say that, I guess detractors of Trump like to criticize him for trying to pander to the base, but it seems like he's been pretty consistent on what he cares about and how he wants, and what the Trump doctrine is. It doesn't seem to be dictated by those trying to divide it. So I give him credit for that, like especially on Israel stuff. During all of the, beefing on podcasts in the internet space as things were fracturing, Trump has Bibi in Mar-a-Lago, and then he, does the Iranian strike and coordination and brags about it. And I feel like, say what you want, ultimately the base, whatever that may be at this point, or whatever it will look like, kind of respects people who are true to their own instincts, and respects those who assert their positions proudly and don't try to pander. One thing they hate is the pandering. One of the reasons Trump is appealing is he doesn't try to say what he thinks those people want to hear in the way Kamala or Obama or Biden tried to. He's not candor calculated. He says what he feels and what he believes. And I'm not saying he's necessarily an ideological figure, but he certainly puts his own sort of instincts, gut, temperament, before trying to pander to what other people think. He doesn't care about those kind of things. And so whatever that pressure is, now I can't say the same for Vance. It's sort of an unknown as a vice president. It's a bit
Wait,
different.
I'm going to ask you about him. So give me one.
Yeah. So we'll shelf Vance.
Yeah.
Vance is a different scenario, but in the Trump world, Trump makes those determinations. He's not being dragged by Israel or Bibi or anyone else. I think I heard him speak at the White House Hanukkah party. And he says, what I like to do? What I do is I make the decision quickly. And then when people tell me they're going to give you such a hard time, I say, oops, sorry, I already made the decision. There's nothing you can do. I wait. They said they're going to call me. So I ignore all the phone calls, all the advice. I shut the phones down. I make the decision. I move the embassy. And then the phone calls come in. Sorry, I can't. What can I do? What can I do? I already did it. So he was joking about that. Still, fairly confidently operates by his own accord.
Yeah. By the way, what kind of food do they have at the Hanukkah party at the White House?
I don't know. You have to be a real schlump to go and eat, because only like the real frumpy Lubavs and those you separate the different kinds of Jews by the ones who are pounding brisket and prime rib while you're trying to talk. If
Right.
you're wearing a tux, it's not the best. It's not the best environment for slopping down a schmorg.
Right. Okay. So you were at the TPUSA AmFest conference. A lot of the cool videos you put out, walking through the crowd, doing your impressions. And like I said, guys, watch Ami's discussion about, I think, a 2-part discussion about what happened there.
Mhm.
And you mentioned there was a sort of split between the, how would you call it, the Groypers? I don't know, generally speaking, maybe the Groypers, but a lot of like aligned Groypers, maybe
Mhm.
people who might not call themselves that. Even when Ben Shapiro spoke, the first or second question after his amazing speech was the thing about the USS Liberty. That was
Mhm.
like, the fact that that comes up shows a sort of shift in the movement, I think, at least when some parts of it. So do you think, could you broadly speaking, the younger base, because that's Amfest, how much percentage wise, roughly speaking, are the crazies and how much are the normies?
It's not split. Split is a misnomer because it distorts the idea that it's like a 50-50 torn, half for Ben, half for Tucker, half against Ben, half for Tucker. It's not the case. It's still the majority is what Charlie Kirk was. Turning Point is what the extension of what Charlie Kirk's philosophy, political ideology was. And part of that was conservative, Christian, and philo-Semitic and pro-Israel, like super pro-Israel. What people are confused about is that the release of screenshots posthumously, without him here to defend himself, have revealed that privately he was venting about donors. Go to any pro-Israel conference and like look in people's phones and see what they're privately saying about each other, even people on the same side of an issue. That doesn't reveal your public positions shifting. Okay. Charlie wanted to focus on Christianity. He wanted to focus on domestic issues. And he was pro-Israel, but he was frustrated with having to be the sole guy batting to have to defend every single Israel issue. And he gave advice because he wanted to see this issue and Israel be defended by more people in a better, more precise, more maybe nuanced way, but more effective way. That's where things left off. So people have already given into this idea because of nefarious actors like Candace Owens or Tucker Carlson that he was somehow shifting and all these kinds of things. And that's just not true. That's just not where things were. The Groyper element at Turning Point is like a mole on the back of the body of Turning Point. They're there, they're present. Some people want to eliminate the mole because it's cancerous and will spread, and others want to say, no, we don't get rid of moles. You know, that's not what we do. We don't cancel moles. They're interlopers. They're there and they're disruptive. They're not invited, but they set up a booth and they start. And you can tell they're there to kind of cause trouble and be naughty and be mischievous. Most of the kids are not really that intimidating. They're just like sort of lost Christian white kids. I don't know even how Christian they are, but they're kind of lost and not spoken for. So the people speaking out for them are these sort of, you know, Fuentes, you know, Christian nationalist, neo-Nazi sort of white nationalist type folks. And they're following bad leaders and bad people leading them astray. But they're also at that phase in life where they kind of want to push the boundaries and be edgelords. I'm not making an excuse for them. I'm just saying the lay of the land is that they're not representative of what Turning Point is. But within Turning Point, you also have sort of, you know, these subdivisions. So you have the Groypers, which is sort of the most extreme. And then you have your like typical, like, you know, super pro-Israel Christian Zionists on this side. You have the Jewish Zionists that you know, that sort of cohort that's there, that's always been very supportive of Turning Point, who are conservative as well. And then you have sort of the Tucker fans who aren't with the Groypers, but they also want to focus on America's issues. They're sort of Matt Walsh type figures, who people who you know, support Israel winning. You know, they're not pro-Hamas in any sort of meaningful way at all, but they don't want to be involved. They want America to focus. They see this whole thing as a distraction from America's issues. And so they're frustrated at that in that regard. As if AIPAC disappeared tomorrow, their problems would go away. I mean, it's kind of a false juxtaposition there. But they're not like in the Groyper camp either. And then it's sort of everyone at Turning Point, even the Groypers hate Candace Owens because she's trying to burn down Turning Point. She turns on Nick Fuentes. The Groypers do hate inauthenticity. Say what you want about Nick Fuentes. He's an authentic anti-Semite. He really believes these things. He really does. So the grifters, the people who are kind of using this for self-aggrandizement and opportunistic, you know, audience building like Candace and even Tucker, they're getting a little weary of and a little tired of. Now, Ben stole the show. His speech, I think, I'm biased, but was met with multiple rounds of unanimous applause. So and then of course the during the USS Liberty question posed to Ben Shapiro, you heard the scattering like cheer for them, and you kind of identified where those pockets of Groypers were that were like, yeah, stick it to him. So I don't know, 80-20, 70-30. The question is, where does it trend, in what direction? And that is going to require some courage on the part of Turning Point to draw some lines in the sand. That's what Ben is imploring them to do.
But wait, it's not. So that's why I said that the like Groyper adjacent type of people, the people who are playing footsie with them. So last time when we spoke, you basically said that there's a problem with me saying that Megyn Kelly is a disappointment. This was like 6 months ago, maybe.
Yeah.
Because you were saying that she is generally pro, but we can disagree and this and that. But then she goes, for example, to the TPUSA and does an interview with, I think, Variety or one of those magazines, and says, actually, I think it came out pretty much the same day she spoke at the conference, that Barry Weiss and Ben Shapiro are making people become anti-Semitic. She's basically blaming the Jews for people hating the Jews.
Yeah.
She refuses to not disavow, but even criticize Tucker on anything. She also has taken credit for making Erica Kirk fly to Nashville to meet Candace Owens for 4 hours. She then refuses to say anything bad about Candace Owens, says she's becoming more of her friend. And then she gets interviewed on stage by Posobiec, who then takes pictures with Myron Gaines, who's a pro-Hitler person. So you have all these people that they won't say we're Groypers, obviously, and they aren't Groypers, but they definitely are, I would say, playing footsie with this type of, okay, we don't hate the Jews, but we're not going to come out and say bad things about those who definitely are accommodating the Jew haters, because Tucker has Jew haters on his show. That's like irrefutable at this point. So how do you look at that wing of the movement?
You have like your good and you have your evil, and then you have in the middle a couple different people. You have cowards who are scared of losing audience and are trying to hedge their bets on the right play here. Megyn at this point falls into that category for me. She's trying to assess. I have unfortunately lost a lot of respect for what she's done since our last conversation. Was our last conversation before or after Charlie was killed? I don't actually. It was before. So in that environment, I can understand why she doesn't want to publicly condemn one close friend in Tucker Carlson and wants to focus on other things and wants to give a note to the pro-Zionist Jewish community that she's advocated for, that if you turn in such a drastic way on people who've advocated for you temperamentally, that's not a very wise decision to make. You push people away. However, it's also not an emotionally mature position to take, to change your positions on policy because people are annoying you. You would never become less pro-life if other people in the pro-life movement gave you shit. Like if people gave her or Charlie or anybody else a hard time or were annoying, you wouldn't change how you feel about abortion. So I just think it's just as emotionally immature for Megyn to claim, I'm going to go the opposite way, so back off. I'm like, this, you're being a child also. Granted, there might be Zionists who are annoying you. There might be, Mark Levin might be annoying you and might be acting childish too, but then be the adult in the room. Don't be another child if you find that what he's doing is too reactionary. But also,
can I just interrupt one thing? That she got angry that Ben Shapiro mentioned her as in his speech, basically, and
well, you're skipping ahead.
Her.
You're skipping ahead. So
right.
that was at the time when we spoke about Megyn at the time. That was her flaw.
Right.
Her flaw was being just as emotionally reactionary. Yeah. But I was charitable because I was like, look, in general, I think you've been like on the right side of these issues and I've been advocating strongly, and I appreciated that. And I think as a community, like, we can hold two thoughts in our head at the same time. We can say, I think you're misguided here, but we also can appreciate, and we shouldn't turn on those who are most of the time on the same page as us. Channel your outrage at the right people and have a little bit of gratitude. But Megyn has demonstrated that she's unwilling to stand up to the actual people who are making the difficult conversations hard, and trying to pander to the sort of Candace Owens verse, which is just post Charlie Kirk, unforgivable. I mean, not even that I'm taking it personally, but just to say I can't respect that when the one person who I think has done the most damage post Charlie Kirk is clearly Candace Owens, and has the most clearly unethical behavior. Forget even the Israel position, just in tarnishing his legacy, his positions, dragging Erica Kirk into this in a time of mourning. And for you not to be able to first of all play dumb and say, I don't follow it that closely, while at the same time saying we've actually become closer, and then trying to hide behind Erica Kirk saying you've been working behind the scenes. I'm sorry. Like, I've just lost a lot of respect for that whole way she's conducted herself. And what can I tell you? So to me, it falls under mostly cowardice, and then getting emotional about, Ben Shapiro calling out that conduct as cowardice. Are you not an adult who can't handle criticism? This is exactly what you've advocated for. Your whole point is we should be able to criticize whether it's Israel, Bibi, but the second it comes back at you, you turn into a teenager. And so I can't respect that. Then there's also people who maybe are naive in the middle and say, oh, the Groypers thing, that's a small thing. We don't need to focus on that. They're not a real threat. They're not a real problem. And there's people who kind of bury their heads in the sand, who pretend like this online world is not a real world and a real force that's happening. So there's a couple of people in the middle there. And then there's the people who are maybe sympathetic to it or want to use it purely for, self-aggrandizement and audience building to try to appeal to those audiences so they won't condemn because, I don't know, the Jack Posobiec taking a picture with Myron Gaines. There are these people who think that as long as someone hasn't physically hurt anybody yet and it's just words, I don't cancel people, I don't condemn people. That's a leftist thing. So they blind themselves to say, they're slaves to their own branding in a way. They're like, I don't cancel people. So that means what? You don't have any standards of critique or criticism. You don't criticize all bad ideas, no matter where you find them. Then you're just not a serious, intellectually and emotionally mature person.
Right. And also the conservative movement historically, even though a lot of these people are like, they refuse to, it's very weird because conservatism is built on history. It's built on conserving.
Yeah.
So you're looking back and building forward. Bill Buckley, he's the one that, William F. Buckley was the one that threw out the John Birch Society from the conservative movement and made sure that neo-Nazis wouldn't be part of the movement. And now people are like, no, we can't. It's not canceling someone if you don't like bring them into your tent. You just not bring them into your...
It's all a straw man. They act as if Ben Shapiro has called to deplatform, arrest, or prosecute all of these people. Freedom of speech goes both ways. They have the right to say this filth, and Turning Point has every right to disassociate from it. And they're not doing that. So they're not actually exercising free speech in the way that it actually should be practiced.
So why aren't they? Like, for example, when Charlie Kirk was alive, I remember distinctly was throwing people out of Turning Point events. He was making sure that not just Fuentes wasn't coming in, but his people weren't coming in. And there's videos of him throwing people out who were asking sort of the USS Liberty type of questions. I don't know if that's specific one, but there's a bunch of videos. So he had the standard. For him, it wasn't canceling. For him, it was to, make the movement not crazy, not hatred of Jews. There's now a video of him saying that if you hate Jews, you have no part of the conservative movement. And yet you have all these people that are his friends, are carrying on his torch, and they're refusing to put any standards almost at all for some reason.
Yeah, I think there's a whole bunch of factors playing into that. One is the trauma of losing Charlie in that fashion, the chaos that happens when Charlie's sort of holding the line singularly as a singular figure, as a distinctly skilled political operative, grassroots organizer, sort of defining Turning Point singularly, so that when he's gone, the team around him who were supporting him are a little bit disoriented, lost, confused, and what they have is this massive organization, a massive audience, and there's a power vacuum of all these different kinds of factions fighting for that audience. And a lot of those people are nefarious. Now, what they're scared of doing is signaling to the audience that they're betraying Charlie's brand of not canceling people, of having a big tent. And if they cast people out who the audience, some they fear are fans of, then they will lose that brand authenticity of being open to ideas and debating ideas, even though at its core it's not true. They don't invite pedophiles to Turning Point to debate the merits of pedophilia. Let's debate it. Hey, it's a marketplace of ideas. This guy wants to make the case for pedophilia. Let's debate it. they would say no, like we have boundaries.
But even Marxism, they wouldn't invite a Marxist to say how great Marxism is. Because there's a conservative sort of framework that you're working
Yes, no, but that's
within.
not true. Because like Charlie would go to campuses, he would debate professors.
Right.
Like in the
But at the
marketplace of ideas, there are
campus,
certain things.
right?
But
Yeah.
again, that's where the confusion is. There a combination of the disorientation post the trauma of what's going on, and then not recognizing that yes, we are bounding together around not just a movement for movement's sake. It's not just some team with some arbitrary flavor that's against the left. There's a set of ideas here that I think Charlie understood, but even Charlie might have had some blind spots for personal relationships and friendships that were turning nefarious. And that can happen when you work with people for years and years and years, and you don't want to, friendship can be a morally corrupting or confusing force, as we spoke about last time. The point being, in this space now, there is this common enemy, the left, right, which is going to ascend. We're already seeing it now, Mamdani, New York, and I think there's going to be more and more victories for them, unfortunately. But some people in the Turning Point universe and the conservative movement more broadly feel like, oh, in order to fight the left, we have to unite and lose all standards for who we associate with as long as they're against the left. And there's other people who say, no, 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 no. If we want to defeat the left, we unite on principle, on integrity, on common values, and we reject the racism and actual bigotry or misogyny or all these things that the left falsely caricatured us as and falsely categorized and portrayed us as. And if we let them in, then we hand over the victory to the left rather than fight it. You can't fight if you're confused and demoralized. A lot of these people who are causing, like, they don't want to be divided. I understand that. But then you need to remove the agents of division and confront and call those people out, and the agents of confusion, because you can't win victories culturally or politically if you're confused and demoralized. And so what Ben Shapiro and those in that camp, and I consider myself one of them, are trying to do is identify the actual agents of division. Look at what Tucker is saying about the left. Look at what Candace is saying or not saying about the left, and focusing all of their outrage on Christian Zionists, allies of Charlie, allies of conservatism, fellow conservatives. These are not allies. These are not people on your team. That's the whole point. They're on their team.
What? Right. And one thing that I find very demoralizing for myself, even though I'm in Israel, but I grew up in the US and grew up on a lot of these people that were talking at Turning Point or, surrounded by it, is that, and I think Ben Shapiro spoke about this, the victim mentality. So you have this sort of worldview that the left has been preaching, whereas every shortcoming of yourself is on society, on structural, institutional racism and bigotry and homophobia and Islamophobia and xenophobia and all these phobias and everything. And where the conservative movement was coming in and say personal responsibility, individualism, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, all these things. And I look at it as, I don't know if we spoke about this last time, is that 5-6 years ago, I lost almost all my eyesight and I'm now legally blind. And one of the things that was pertinent for me was when I was told that you're going blind, is they told me, you can just go on to, disability, like leave your job, go to disability. It's actually, if you continue working, you won't get the government stipend. And I was like, I think I said, I'm not taking the government money. I'm continuing my job. And I think one of the reasons why I did that was because I grew up in the type of worldview that you're not a victim if you decide not to be one. And now you see that the conservative Tucker all day talks about how basically America's bad and all your problems are because of America's badness. Or like all these nefarious people behind the scenes are, and Candace, the Zionists, the Frankists, you talk about that a lot. So in the Turning Point conference, you saw a lot of that also, like all these speeches by Steve Bannon and Tucker himself, and all these other people were saying how.
Well, Tucker's speech was completely incoherent.
Well,
I mean, people didn't know where to clap. It's not really what Tucker says. It's more like what he doesn't say, and he doesn't have really coherent ideas. He said at one point, like, if my brother went on a murderous drug spree and killed a bunch of people, I wouldn't turn him in. Meanwhile, Tyler Robinson was turned in by his father. So, and people didn't know what to do with that. They didn't know what to do.
What do you think about my general take on victim mentality on the right?
Yeah, that's why it's the woke right. I mean, the defining common feature that they have in common between the woke left and the woke right is grievance culture, victim culture, and group identity being, it's essentially It's the same as the woke left, but now the white disaffected, disenfranchised are playing the same game of intersectionality and group identity, but they're putting themselves into the mix and saying white people are the most oppressed, and they're finding a scapegoat as opposed to, instead of white supremacy being the villain, Jewish supremacy is the villain. It's like pick and choose, plug and chug. That's just a reshuffling of the deck with the exact same features. Instead of white supremacy and patriarchy, it's, psyops, false flags, and Jewish supremacy being the problem. Meanwhile, they're ignoring like the real civilizational threats like radical Islam.
Tucker loves Islam. He said that you can't criticize it. Yeah.
And I think they're too afraid to criticize that, so they'd rather scapegoat the reasons for that and put it on the Jews. It's just easier to do that. And there's nothing more successful. There's nothing more annoying than a successful minority, which hurts the left and offends the left and the right. It offends the left's claim that all the problems are systemic. It offends the woke right's claim that, hey, we are the majority people in the country, and therefore we are entitled to success based on our immutable whiteness characteristics. And they ignore culture. They ignore personal responsibility, finding yourself a family, a community, values, things like that to, get behind and build yourself up towards. The problem is, though, where I had a little bit of mercy and kind of trying to understand the sort of Groyper side is that you do have all of these kids who have been told for a long time by the culture that they are worthless. They've been told they're the bottom. They're white Christian men, and they've been told in a sort of woke left culture that perhaps they've been raised in, that they're the bottom of the barrel, they're the bottom of the hierarchy, and now they're clapping back. But the problem is, instead of clapping back with the right ideas, they're just clapping back with the exact same MO. It's not black people or minorities that are entitled to special treatment. It's us that are now entitled to special treatment. And what I was trying to say to them is, all these people you're following are, they tell you want to be successful, you want to find a mate, you want to find a girl, you want to, become an appealing male out there, and yet then you got to become successful, you got to take responsibility. But yet these people spend all day demonizing successful people, demonizing successful Jews. Tucker talking about Bill Ackman didn't really deserve his money. I mean, that's classic leftist strategy and classic leftist types of thinking, and they're doing that, and yet and these are models for you for success. Myron Gaines, Nick Fuentes, these people are not married, they have no families, and these kids, the problem is they really don't have a lot of sense of community. They lack a kahila, they lack a sense of that because they've been told they don't deserve one, or to have one is hateful or wrong. And I can understand that if you're sort of a white Christian man finding your community, all these other groups get to have theirs, they feel they don't get to have theirs. So there needs to be a resurgence of what Charlie was trying to do as the angel amongst the devils who are fighting for this cohort. Charlie was trying to say, like, you don't need anti-Semitism. You don't need to blame Jews. Get married, have a family, go to church. And a lot of what Turning Point is trying to do is encourage these people, especially young men, to get back to church, get back to faith, get back to family, those kind of things.
By the way, what did you think of Vivek Ramaswamy's speech, in the sense that you see among the anti-Semites on the right that they hate the Hindus too?
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
pretty obvious that Nick Fuentes, for example, spoke about J.D. Vance's wife, who's of Indian, I think, descent, but also she's a Hindu. And you see them against Vivek himself in Ohio. What's his name? Fuentes said he's going to go campaign against him for the Democrat, who's a white, I think, male or woman, but she's white, and he's I think he's Sri Lankan descent, but he's a Hindu. And so we have a large Hindu audience, by the way, from India on my podcast, which is pretty cool. And can you talk a little bit about what you saw there, why they hate both the Jews and the Hindus?
Because both Jews and Hindus are conveniently not considered white, and therefore, and as minorities by the left, they're not considered oppressed. So the left they don't fit into the left category, and they don't fit into the sort of racist, white nationalist category. So they're othered in that way, and yet they disproportionately succeed as immigrant groups. And so there's a lot of common thread there. I think Vivek had the right idea in that. I had similar arguments to certain Groyper kids who were like arguing with me. And I said, well, listen, the founding fathers supported the idea that you can have separation of church and state. You can have freedom of association and freedom of religion, and therefore you could practice the religion you want and form the communities you want, provided you don't hurt anybody else. Do you agree with that? No, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. So I'm more America first than you. And they'd glitch out on things like that. I mean, you're the one who disagrees with the founding fathers, founding principles, that what it means to be an American. And I think Vivek was spot on when he focused on what it means to be an American. I think he made 2 points about lineage versus, I forgot what the other point was, but I'm
There's the
paraphrasing it.
American, the American that they can trace their, I forgot what it's called, their ancestry
Lineage.
over back to the
Lineage.
Mayflower, or if you're an American by like ideals.
Yes.
But I don't remember the exact
And that was the whole thing,
phraseology.
that what can transcend our different races and immutable characteristics are common ideals and common values and principles. And Vivek was going towards a much more positive, sort of reaffirming what true American spirit and American values are, which allows for different kinds of people to live here as long as they share and buy in to similar common principles and values of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, individualism. That's the whole American project. And we can't leave anybody out. That includes white people. And we don't judge based on immutable characteristics. Those are meaningless. It's what you do. It's your actions. It's your values. It's what you produce. And that's what I thought his speech was pretty spot on. I don't know if it got overshadowed in terms of publicity by what, like, the sort of Ben Tucker beef and Ben's speech. But Ben was kind of calling out the moment, and they both had similar kind of trajectories and what they were aiming for and messages about looking towards what it means to be. Ben's speech was not about him. It was not about Israel. It was not about Jews. It was about them, and that they're being lied to and manipulated, and they can't fail because we all agree that the left rising in power, and especially the populist left, far left that's coming, is a threat. And I think Vivek made a really, illustrated that point really well, that this isn't just about nativism, but you happen to be born here and can trace it back, and that's what makes you American. It's about the common ideals we share.
Yeah, plus it's a losing political strategy. Like, even if you did believe it, there's not enough people that are like lineage Americans to actually win an election anywhere.
Yep.
And if you're talking about coalition building, you're basically throwing everyone out of the coalition. So it's a very weird way to look at things. But so how do you look at the fact that Erica Kirk endorsed J.D. Vance to be the next presidential candidate 3 years ahead of time, and they're like, what do you, like we said before, President Trump doesn't really seem to care about what these people say. Vance, on the other hand, is very close to Tucker. His son, Tucker's son, is J.D. Vance's spokesperson, so he's in the family, so to speak. Tucker, I think, said that he's the one that told Trump, along with Don Jr., to appoint J.D. Vance as the vice presidential nominee. So Vance probably theoretically has sort of a debt to pay to Tucker. How do you feel about J.D. versus Rubio? It seems that this is the new dynamic among at least the activist class. But how do you feel about, where do you think Vance is on these topics?
You have to remember, Trump hasn't been president for a year in his second term. We are having this conversation as if there's a primary. That's 3 years from now. If you think about what happened in just 1 year of the first Trump presidency, in 3 years from now, we could be looking at a completely different landscape, completely different issues on the world stage, completely different cultural divides. So we are having this conversation prematurely, and it's understandable why you want to see at a time when lines are being drawn, who's standing on principle and who's, kind of using their right judgment and showing leadership. I do think that Vance is somewhat in a difficult situation, given that if Tucker is the one responsible for him being vice president, then it's going to be a long time before Vance publicly condemns Tucker in any sort of way. I feel like Vance is looking for a way to not do that and keep a coalition together, whilst also not playing footsie with the Groypers and cozying up to them. That's obviously a deal breaker for him. They called his wife a Jeet. They call him a race mixer. He's not in line with the Groypers. So if anybody's concerned about that, like, J.D. Vance is not a fan of Nick Fuentes. What he tries to do is sort of minimize, the effect of the Groypers and say they're a distraction. I also think, we can understand a couple of things here. JD Vance, I think, supported Israel from his position as vice president throughout the war, winning against Hamas. But he might not be Israel might not be his singular issue in the way for a lot of Jews. It's one of the most important issues on their hierarchy of values, that Israel is something pretty paramount to a lot of Zionist Jews and even Christian Zionists in this country that care a lot about Israel and the U.S.-Israel relationship. And I think that it's not that J.D. Vance doesn't care about that, but he does, I think, feel connected with a lot of the disenfranchised community in this country that have felt left behind. And he wants to focus on domestic issues. So his way of doing that is to say, is to sort of stay out of the online theater of the things that we're all
Can I
witnessing.
push back on you a little bit, which is to say that he gave an interview like a few weeks ago, and he was asked specifically about the debate about anti-Semitism on the right.
Yeah.
And his answer was that there's no real anti-Semitism on the right.
Right.
The issue is Israel. So basically, he took what the entire Tucker Candace thing, which he was asked about, he was asked about specifically Tucker and all this, and instead of saying like, I condemn or there is an issue here, but it's small, whatever, he said the entire thing is about how we should treat Israel. And
Yeah,
to
I
me,
think he takes.
that's very concerning.
I think he takes that to mean the reason this is front and center in people's minds is not that they're animated by Jew hatred,
but they are. A lot of them.
I think in his mind, I think the way he sees it, because he's not watching every episode of Tucker or Candace necessarily, he's got actual Tucker Carlson in his ear saying, oh, don't worry about that fake news press. They're going to go crazy on me. You know how they misrepresent all of us conservatives? You know how they smear Trump all the time in the fake news? They're doing some hit piece on me. Don't worry about that. You have to understand, not everybody is viewing the landscape in the exact same way. And if you're J.D. Vance, first of all, you're the vice president. So you have to be by nature a very calculated, neutral stance. You can't go against, you have to support what the president's doing. And you sort of have to wait things out and see. And I think he's trying to be cautious and careful. I don't think that's a good strategy. Like, I think leadership and drawing lines in the sand would be very much appreciated. And I think it would be strategically beneficial. But I think he's trying to see it as, I can keep all this coalition together. I can say that, yes, listen, while there's a huge war in Gaza and this is front and center, everybody's talking about it, but like, that'll all go away. You don't have to worry about it. Once we focus on domestic issues here and rebuild America and make it great again, all that stuff will solve itself. We're giving these people too much power. I think that's naive. I don't think that's accurate, but I also can understand a scenario by which, I don't think JD, I don't think JD Vance might not have a lot of Jews and people in this issue, in this space, in his corner, kind of affiliating him with what's actually going on here and how these people are behaving. I sense that not everybody's as online and plugged into every single thing, especially in the political space. Even Trump himself, he tweets, but is he watching every viral YouTube clip that's coming? We are watching a whole theater play out that we're like fully deep into. And so when somebody doesn't get something or tries to play it off in the safe way of saying, look, these Groypers, these people, they're not representative of you. And I think there's a thing that Vance is doing, which he's trying to disassociate so that these people don't fall prey to these nefarious actors. They're not you. And he's messaging that not just to the Jews. He's trying to message it to those same people who may be adjacent to the Groypers. But, that's how I read what he's doing, which is like, white people, it's okay to be white. It's okay to criticize Israeli policy. It doesn't make you evil. It doesn't make you bad. So that when these people come in like Fuentes and say, we are anti-Semitic, we are this and that, they can disassociate. I think that's what's going on. I don't think it's necessarily the right strategy. I think more clear moral stances need to be taken when there's all these people meddling. But that you're asking me for the analysis here as to what's going on. The alternative is what? He's actually trying to play footsie with white supremacists who hate his wife? No. I don't think that's what's going on.
I think that he's
turning a blind eye to it. Yes, but I think in his mind, he's trying to say that these forces, these dark forces, these nefarious forces, let's not give them attention. Let's not give anti-Semitism attention. And again, like the left has overused that card for so long of racism, bigotry. They've called you all these white supremacists. We're not that, right? We're not that. We're not into Fuentes, right? And he can still represent these same people that Fuentes is maybe trying to say he speaks on behalf of, but steer them away from him. It's a different strategy. It's a different way he's employing it. But I think what Ben Shapiro did, and he's in a different position than J.D. Vance did, but I think that's what's going on through his mind. If you ask him, I'm trying to read through the lines here, and he makes the mistake of saying, we don't subject people to purity tests and those kind of things. I think he's missing and misdiagnosing the problem and how to treat it. I think he doesn't agree with the problem. It's like if you're looking at two different oncologists, it's not like J.D. Vance is pro-cancer and Ben Shapiro is against cancer. They're both looking at it, and J.D. Vance is saying this treatment will work, and Ben Shapiro's like, no, this needs to be removed or it will metastasize. And J.D. Vance is saying, well, maybe we can try a different treatment that's softer, that's not as aggressive, and maybe the cancer will fix itself. I don't know. You know what I mean? But they're not agreeing. It's not like they're on different sides of the issue on is cancer a bad or a problem. I think J.D. Vance is saying it's not at this advanced stage yet. It's stage 1, with the right, local therapies, with the right treatments. We don't need surgery. We can just do these other things and it will, with time, heal itself. We don't need to go extreme. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
I guess. I don't know if I agree, but I understand what you're saying. What did you think of, just quickly, and then I have two last small issues. What did you think of the fact that they're already endorsing him? Because that's weird. It's 3 years in advance.
Yeah.
Why is it so important to them because they're going to have an AmFest next year, and they're going to have an AmFest in 2 years. Why are they endorsing him?
I mean, it's not, I don't take it. I think it's just in the moment as somebody who was close to Charlie personally, and they're endorsing him as sort of a cultural ambassador figure for the cause of continuing MAGA, continuing Trump, continuing the legacy. But we're in no place that endorsements are significant, given that it's 3 years away before elections are taking place. I think right now he is that symbolic figurehead of, we know Trump is done after these 3 years. So everyone kind of is mentally thinking about who's going to take this mantle, who is next. And I think given his close ties that Rubio doesn't have to the Turning Point universe, to the Charlie Kirk universe, I guess they bestow it to J.D. Vance to close out. He's also the vice president to close out a big conference. It's the second highest office in the land. So you're going to give him his props. This is a whole operation. It's part of it's spectacle and theater. I wouldn't take that part that literally at this moment. But again, that's what I imagine. I think he's mistaken in doing that, saying we don't subject people to purity tests and things like that. I'm like, that's just not true.
Right.
If Tucker
we
Carlson
do subject people.
It's not purity tests. That's misrepresenting what's going on here. We're not saying that we just disagree with Tucker or Candace on a few little things. No. This isn't about ideas. This is about conduct. And we have standards of conduct. And if Tucker converted to radical Islam tomorrow and became a jihadi, or it came out that he was a criminal or pedophile in the worst of ways, he wouldn't be invited to speak next year. Well, isn't that a purity test? Well, what is that? Are you kidding me? They're confusing this with left-wing cancel culture tactics that can't allow any kind of debate or any kind of disagreement. But this isn't about civil disagreement. This is about unethical conduct. And so that's where he's mistaking and misdiagnosing the problem. And I think a lot of people are doing that. And J.D. Vance is included,
Ami, what about a small thing, and then I'm going to ask you about the left to close out. There was a week when there was this race car competition in Qatar, and a bunch of influencers on the right went to Qatar. So you had Rob Smith, I think his name was, and Emily from Emily Saves America, who were and then they were posting pictures. All the pictures looked to be from the same balcony, by the way.
Okay.
And the texts that they were posting seemed to be pretty much the same texts, which is weird just in general. But how much does Qatar really, you think, just your feeling of things, have put money into the conservative right influence class?
I suspect they put a lot more than just, sort of mid-sized influencers on Instagram. I think it's much more in depth than that. I think there's certainly an effort to elevate divisive messaging and content on the conservative side. When Elon released the update on Twitter that allowed you to identify where these accounts were coming from, you found that all these America First, Rebel America Twitter accounts with
Pakistan.
with a blonde chick with a cleavage that says MAGA only, MAGA, Christ is King, and it turns out it's from Bangladesh, Pakistan. I don't know if that's all tied to Qatar directly, but I think they have a vested interest in causing that demoralization. I'm not sure what they want exactly, but what happens is they elevate and boost certain content to make it seemingly be organic and viral, and then there's an actual organic viral response. So I don't think they work necessarily in direct coordination with a Tucker or a Candace to say Qatar is funding them. That I don't think has been substantiated. But you can definitely see a scenario which they elevate certain videos and content and things like that, and there are these like bot farms that boost that kind of stuff. And yeah, they are trying to maybe get this normalized image that we're and get these people out to Qatar. And look, I don't know. The people who've gone, yeah, one could call into question their sort of judgment in getting a free trip to these countries. We should also just reflect that, we take as seriously as you want, the messaging that you're getting out of there, and just be discerning and have some standards and say, okay, such and such person got a free trip to Qatar and had a nice time. That's possible almost anywhere with an organized tour. There are bigger ways to form your analysis over whether a country is behaving nefariously or not. The people who make those small compromises along the way, I see why and how that can happen, and how even themselves can be fooled, not realizing they're being used for something wrong by just saying, "Oh, sure, I'll go, I'll check it out." I think it behooves us to just make sure we're holding ourselves to a standard by we're big boys and girls. We can see that, oh, somebody went on a trip and took nice pictures. Okay, we can get crazy about that, or we can just say we know what's going on here and have the bigger, more adult conversation about
Yeah.
it.
I agree. Lastly, one of the things that you said in the beginning of our conversation was that the left is going to have big victories, you think, and that the victories will be had in a lot of places by the more radical leftists.
Yes.
So you spoke about Mamdani in New York, where I grew up in, but it's not just him. In other areas of the country, the Democrats seem to be promoting a more radical class, but it's cloaked in messaging that is less crazy. So you saw that in the last election, where instead of speaking about all his crazy stuff, he'll say affordability, affordability, affordability. And it's like a magic trick where everyone says, yeah, everything, we need affordability, which is it is a real issue, but nobody looks really at his solutions. And then you get a bunch of crazy people voted for by people who don't really, I guess, understand. They just want to throw out the people who are in control now. We're going to see that, I guess, in the midterms, right?
I mean, the left notoriously always uses language that is deceptive and dishonest. It starts with language. Affordability. They don't run saying, we're going to seize property. We're going to steal people's money that we didn't earn in order to use it for ourselves, whilst enriching ourselves in the process and only further facilitating the same problems that started this to begin with. They say affordability. Who could be against affordability? Healthcare for all. Who could be against healthcare for all? I think the right makes the mistake of not going and playing on emotion and what's resonant with people. They go on data, statistics, those kind of things that don't actually persuade human beings. We're not working with machines here and just plugging in voting based on data and numbers alone. It's messaging and narrative and story and those kind of things. And I think conservatives who deal a lot in reality and consequences of set policy often think that that's enough presentationally to win elections. But you win elections based on, and I think that's the problem. Mamdani won because you didn't have an alternative candidate who was just as revolutionary, just as capitalist as he was communist, just as Zionist as he was anti-Zionist, even though Israel isn't obviously central to, let's say, Western, pro-Western, as he was anti-Western. You had Cuomo and all these other people who tried to sort of out-socialist him. And we knew they didn't mean that. They were like, I'm going to make it more affordable. I passed this policy. We had sort of people trying to say, I'm the real leftist here, and he's the real leftist. So I just think what you really need is a counter-revolutionary spirit in the form of someone who's proudly capitalist and proudly pro-Western. All the things antithetical to what Mamdani truly stands for, and keeping him honest about that. But they're going to run on these crusades and revolutions and all these things. They always historically have done that. They always run on progress, making things better while destroying everything and destroying the things that, have been.
But do you think there's a good chance that they're going to win now? And everyone I speak to who's political, which I'm, in terms of like how Congress works, which I don't think we're both that, but the prediction is that they'll win probably pretty big.
Mhm.
And then the number one thing they'll start doing is the impeachment stuff. That'll be, the first thing, and it'll be the next 2 years after the election.
Oh.
And if that happens, there's a good chance they'll, in 2028, it's way down the road, but
Mm.
the same thing that happened in, people, I think, will get very tired of this impeachment stuff pretty fast. That's just my feeling. We don't know what's going to happen. Like anything could happen. You have the Epstein files, but like on steroids, and you'll have, they'll be
I'm not a
bringing up.
political analyst, but I
Right.
think that they've tried to focus on that so many times, the losing strategy of just being anti-Trump rather than being pro their own sort of neo-Marxist, communist agenda. I think they're seeing, they're going to model what's happening at the local levels, like at the mayoral level. The radicals are winning. The radicals are authentic in that they believe what they really, they're not some like center left Democrat that wants capitalism but wants to regulate it slightly. No. Revolution. Tear it down. Mamdani wants to institute rental ripoff hearings to put these property owners on trial because of the conditions of the tenants. Meanwhile, the reason the conditions are so bad is because you don't allow these people to make profit and develop properties. So it's just the classic eat the rich. You're going to have people going down Park Avenue as the proletariat, right? Breaking into the bourgeoisie and destroying property. And this is the kind of stuff that Mamdani supports. So they're going to see that as political victories. But what's interesting, it's just funny to see what's happening with Maduro in Venezuela. It's like they can't
They love him.
they can't wrap their head around it because he's this authoritarian dictator of a failed left-wing, experiment. What are they supposed to do? What's really interesting is there's this clip going around, and I think it's with John Krasinski from the Tom Clancy novel. They made it into a show where he's trying to explain Venezuela as a strategic threat, and it's like a clip from a Netflix show. I'm blanking on what the show is, but it's like on Twitter. It says Venezuela explained. Now, what's interesting is they make a parallel to Maduro, right? In this clip. Now, keep in mind, it's Netflix or something, or Hulu, whatever it is. I forget what the show is, but it's with John Krasinski playing one of those spy things, and he's teaching a class. And it's interesting. I pay very close attention to how they framed it. They're like, Venezuela is actually the biggest strategic threat to the United States. Meet so-and-so, and it's supposed to be Maduro, somebody like a Maduro. But they call him a nationalist leader, right? A nationalist leader who bankrupted the country. And the person running against him who's legitimate is
the
a
socialist?
social justice activist. And what they did was they flipped the categories because they couldn't admit in sort of more woke-centric media in Hollywood that the person who bankrupted the country was the leftist. They couldn't do that. And I find that so funny. So I wonder what's going to play out in seeing the example of Venezuela. But I don't know. I am confident in the American spirit that tends to be a little more resistant than sort of the Europeans to these sort of things in like far left radicalism. Like there's something about America in its culture and its history and its individualism that combats that. But listen, Mamdani's telling you what he is. He's not hiding it, and he won. Now, I don't know if he won in spite of his radicalism because people just want solutions. But the thing is, all those left-wing policies are unfalsifiable because they will always say that when they don't work and they make things worse, they came in on a blame grievance culture and they will continue on a blame grievance culture. You see, it's the capitalists, it's Wall Street that made this less affordable. They didn't actually institute my policies. It made the buses more expensive. It made the food more expensive. It made the rents go up. It's the greedy capitalists because nothing is easier than pointing at other people and blaming them for your problems.
Yeah,
They'll never
but
take accountability.
But you agree, I think, that it's most likely that the Republicans will lose the House. I mean, and the Democrats will have big wins. And the only question, I guess, is for me, and we don't know yet, is who those Democrats will be.
Yeah.
So will they be the Mamdani AOC types, or will they be? But it does seem like the Chuck Schumer, older, saner, even though it's weird that Chuck Schumer is now considered the moderate, but whatever.
Well, I think it's becoming increasingly polarized. So you're getting what the instability is happening where the far left is seeking the victory politically and the far right is resisting culturally and saying, no more immigration. Look what's happening with these Somalian immigrants in Minnesota and the fraud scandals. And we're sick of it. And we're going to go on which I've seen things about like a tax protest and not pay because the government's so fraudulent. And then it's become, and I don't know what happens when that eventually reaches this fever pitch and breaks. It just feels like they're so divided that it just becomes this power struggle. And if the right doesn't clean house properly, all the left has to say is, look, Nazis over there. And instead of in the past when they made it up, they'll be right. So you hand them the victory on a silver platter.
So Ami, I want to say, first of all, one thing that I would say just before I let you go is that Israelis are always talking about kituv chevrati, like how everyone hates each other here. Yeah. And I think when we look at America, we're like, we're still not there yet. America is at a whole different level of people hating each other. Like, I mean, you have families that won't talk to other family members who like voted for Trump and vice versa. Although I think with the Republicans, they're a little more accepting of people who voted for Kamala, but still the hatred among Americans is so deep that like, if you look at
no? I never see it in Israel the way people describe it of like, oh, it's so divided here. I'm like, you're all Jews. What are you talking about? You're all at one Shabbos table arguing. Okay, you're at the same table.
Exactly.
Trying to figure out there are no hostage posters that have been ripped down anywhere in Israel. I haven't seen a single one with scoff marks on it and tear down marks on it. Yeah, you're divided, but go to New York City by Union Square and you'll see hostage posters that have had to be reattached, taped. They've been ripped down repeatedly. You don't know what division is until you see, this kind of perversion. So.
I agree. So in a way, as someone speaking from Israel to you, you gave us a little bit of like, it can still get worse and it's still okay a little bit here. But Ami, true pleasure talking to you as always. Keep up the good fight, and we will follow you at Ami's house. And you're doing shows, so everyone check out where Ami's doing a show and get tickets. It's well worth the purchase, and you're keeping him going. So Ami, thank you so much for being with us, and we'll see you pretty soon. Toda rabba.
Toda.